Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. It was just past 6 in the evening when I first noticed the soft knock at my door. The kind of knock that isn't quite urgent, but not casual either. A little unsure of itself. That's the word. Unsure, like whoever stood on the other side wasn't certain if they should be there at all. I was standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing the last of the dinner dishes, the warm scent of roasted rosemary chicken still lingering in the air. The sky outside my window was painted in that particular hue of orange and purple that only early spring sunsets seemed to conjure. Everything felt peaceful. Predictable. That knock changed all of it. I dried my hands on the towel that hung neatly by the stove, smoothed down my cardigan, and walked to the front door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I never did, really. Life had slowed in the past few years since Mark passed. It had become a rhythm of quiet days filled with gardening, reading, and a weekly coffee with Linda from the neighborhood book club. When I opened the door, there he was, Ben, my next-door neighbor. We'd exchanged smiles over fences and a few brief chats while bringing in the trash bins or pulling weeds along the property line. He was a few years younger than me, maybe in his late 40s, early 50s. Divorced, I'd heard, and had moved in about 2 years ago. Always kind, quiet, a bit reserved. He looked nervous that evening, clutching a small basket wrapped in a linen cloth. "Hi, Susan," he said, his voice a little husky, like he cleared his throat a few times before walking over. "Sorry to just drop by like this, but I made too many scones and thought, well, maybe you'd like some." I blinked. Scones? It was the last thing I'd expected. My heart fluttered a little, not from excitement, not yet, but from confusion, from curiosity. A man bringing me baked goods at sunset. That hadn't happened since college. I smiled, maybe too broadly. "That's so kind of you, Ben. I'd love some. Would you like to come in? I've got tea, if you're not in a rush." He hesitated for half a second. Just enough to make me wonder if I'd crossed a line. Then he nodded. "Tea sounds nice." We sat in the sunroom, where the last of the daylight streamed through the windows and bathed everything in a golden hue. I poured chamomile into the same porcelain cups Mark and I used to drink from on chilly evenings. There was something oddly comforting about it, familiar yet different. Ben wasn't the talkative type, and neither was I these days, but the silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. In fact, it felt warm, gentle, as though we were both sharing something without needing words. He told me he'd recently started baking as a hobby, said it helped calm his thoughts after long days working from home. I found myself listening to every word, noticing the way his brow furrowed slightly when he talked about his teenage daughter, who lived with her mother most of the time. "I miss her," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's strange, isn't it? You raise them, love them with everything you've got, and then one day they just become someone else's." I nodded. I understood more than he could have known, that aching space children leave behind when they grow into their own lives. "That's not strange at all," I said gently. "It's just being a parent. It's the hardest part, I think. Letting go." Our eyes met in that moment, just for a beat, and I saw something. Recognition, maybe. A kindred sadness tucked beneath years of strength. And trying to carry on, when he left an hour later, after 3 scones and 2 refills of tea, I felt something stir in me that hadn't been there in a long while. A warmth in my chest. A flicker, that night, as I slid into bed, the basket he brought still resting on the counter with 1 scone left inside. I stared at the ceiling and wondered, was it just kindness or something else? I told myself not to read into it. I was 55. He was just being neighborly, that was all. But a quiet voice in the back of my mind whispered something I hadn't let myself hear in years. It's okay to feel again, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't push that voice away. 3 days passed before I saw Ben again. I'd convinced myself that the tea and scones were a one-time thing. A fleeting gesture of neighborly kindness. Still, every time I passed the sunroom or glanced out toward his house, I felt a soft, unfamiliar flutter in my chest. It was foolish. I told myself, childish. But that didn't stop me from listening a little closer for footsteps outside, or taking a little longer with my hair in the mirror. Then came Saturday. The day had warmed unexpectedly, teasing hints of summer. I'd spent the morning trimming the lavender bushes along the fence when I heard a voice call out, "Need a hand?" I turned, and there he was, Ben, standing at the edge of his yard, sleeves rolled up, a shovel in one hand, and a mischievous grin on his face. I'm trying to make my garden look half as nice as yours, he added, nodding toward the bursts of purple and yellow lining my walkway, but I'm pretty sure I'm just digging holes and hoping for a miracle. I laughed, wiping my brow with the back of my glove. Well, miracles and mulch are pretty much the same thing out here. He chuckled and leaned the shovel against the fence. Actually, I was wondering something else. Would you be interested in joining me for dinner tonight? Nothing fancy, just something I'm throwing together. I'd enjoy the company. I froze. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him or imagined it entirely, but his eyes were earnest, uncertain, but open. Dinner, with a man at his house. I hadn't been in that situation in, goodness, over a decade. I smiled slower this time. I'd love that. Ben's house was just like him, neat, unassuming, with small personal touches that revealed more than he probably realized. Framed photos of his daughter lined the hallway and a bookshelf overflowing with travel guides sat in the living room. On the table, he'd set out candles, just two, nothing extravagant, and a lasagna that filled the room with the kind of aroma that makes you feel instantly at home. As we ate, conversation flowed more easily than before. We talked about our pasts. Not just the facts, but the spaces between them. I used to think I'd retire in Italy, he said with a wistful smile, open a little cafe by the water. But life had other plans. I nodded. I thought Mark and I would travel the country in an RV. We even picked out the model. Then his heart gave out too soon, the words came out more easily than I'd expected. Usually, I avoided talking about Mark. It felt like betrayal, but with Ben, it didn't. He didn't look away or offer clichés. He just listened. After dinner, we moved to the back porch. The sky had turned a soft velvet, stars beginning to peek through. The silence was comfortable again, laced with the hum of cicadas and the distant sound of wind chimes from a neighboring yard. I'm glad you came, he said quietly, his voice low. It's been a long time since this house felt like more than a place to sleep. I looked at him then, really looked, the gentle lines around his eyes, the way his hands rested on the arms of the chair, steady and strong. And then he did something that surprised me again. He reached for my hand. He didn't grip it or pull it toward him. He just let his fingers brush against mine, a quiet invitation. I hesitated, not because I didn't want to, but because I'd forgotten what it felt like to be touched with such care. There was no urgency in it, just warmth, respect, the kind of connection that says I see you and I want to know who you are. I let my fingers curl around his. We sat like that for a while, hands resting between us, two people tethered by something unspoken, something real. When I finally walked home under the stars, my heart was beating slower, not racing with nerves or uncertainty, but pulsing with a strange kind of calm, a steadiness I hadn't known I missed. That night, I sat by the window and wrote in my journal for the first time in years just one sentence. Something is waking up in me again. I didn't know where it would lead. But I knew this. It wasn't just about a neighbor anymore. It was about possibility, about rediscovering a version of myself I thought had faded with time. And for the first time in a long while, I was curious about tomorrow. It had been almost 2 weeks since that evening on Ben's porch, since that gentle touch, since I let someone in, even just a little. And in the quiet that followed, life settled into a different kind of rhythm. Subtle shifts, small gestures. Ben waved from his kitchen window when I watered the garden. He left a fresh loaf of bread at my door one morning with a sticky note that simply said, "Still practicing. Let me know if I'm getting better." It wasn't grand or sweeping or the stuff of novels, but it was real. One afternoon, after a brief rain had left the sidewalks damp and the air smelling like wet earth and lilacs, he called. "Hey," he said. "I know it's last minute, but I could use a walk, mind some company?" I didn't even hesitate. "I'll grab my jacket." We met at the corner of our street where the old oak trees arched above the sidewalk like watchful guardians. The clouds were beginning to break apart, letting little fingers of sunlight reach down to touch the pavement. Everything felt freshly washed. We walked slowly, not out of caution, but because neither of us was in a hurry to get anywhere. There was something in the air that day, some quiet energy that made everything feel more alive. We talked about small things at first, his work, my latest attempt at reviving the tomato plants. Then, as we turned into the path through the neighborhood park, the conversation deepened without effort. I used to walk this trail with her. Ben said softly, "My daughter. When she was little, she loved collecting stones and pretending they were magic. One time she gave me one and told me it would protect me from grown-up sadness. He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Do you still have it? I asked gently. He nodded. Top drawer in my nightstand. Every time I think about tossing it, I can't. I paused, then reached out and took his hand again, like I had that night on the porch. This time there was no hesitation. I think it's still working, I said. He stopped walking then, right there beneath a flowering dogwood tree, and looked at me in a way that made my breath catch. Susan, I didn't think I could feel this way again. I didn't expect to. You and we've both lived. I smiled. We have, and we've lost. But maybe, that's why this matters. He nodded slowly, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled something out. A small, smooth stone, barely the size of a walnut. He turned it in his hand and then gently placed it in mine. You need protection too, he said. My throat tightened. I wasn't used to tenderness like this. Not anymore, but in that moment, I realized something I hadn't dared to admit to myself. I was beginning to trust again. We kept walking, hands clasped, the stone warm in my palm. We passed by children on bicycles, couples with strollers, the scent of fresh grass, and damp leaves rising all around us. And somewhere along that winding path, it dawned on me, I wasn't just letting someone in. I was letting myself out, letting myself laugh without guilt, be seen without shame, hope without fear. When we reached the end of the trail, the sun had dipped low, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. I don't want to say goodnight just yet, he said. I turned to him and smiled. Then don't. He took a breath and stepped closer, eyes searching mine, not rushing, not demanding, just asking a question in silence. I nodded. And for the first time in what felt like another lifetime, I felt the soft, tentative press of lips against mine. Not fireworks, not some cinematic explosion. But warmth. Familiarity. A promise of something that might grow slowly, quietly, if we let it. That night, I didn't write in my journal. I didn't need to, because I already knew how the next entry would begin. I think I'm falling. And I'm not afraid. This time, the morning after that kiss, everything looked a little different. It wasn't that the world had changed. It was the way I was seeing it, the way I lingered at the window a little longer with my coffee, watching the early light stretch across my backyard. The way my shoulders felt a little lighter, the air a little warmer, even though the forecast called for clouds. Something inside me had shifted, and maybe that's what happens when you start letting yourself feel again. Not just the joy, but the risk, too. The not knowing, the possibility. Ben called later that afternoon, his voice softer than usual. Can I come over? I told him yes before he even finished the question. He arrived with 2 coffees and a nervous smile. I hope this doesn't feel too fast, he said, handing me the cup. I couldn't stop thinking about last night. I gestured to the chair across from mine in the sunroom. Neither could I. We sat there for a long while, sipping our drinks, letting the silence speak where words would only get in the way. Then he looked at me, really looked. You scare me a little, Susan, he said. I raised an eyebrow, half laughing. Me? He nodded. Because this feels real. And I haven't let anything feel real in a long time. I understood that better than I could explain. I'd built my life after mark around quiet routines, safe edges, predictable days. It was a life that didn't ask too much of me and didn't give too much either, just enough. Ben was more. I'm scared, too, I said, but maybe that's a good thing. He smiled, and the fear in his eyes softened. We spent the rest of the afternoon talking about the things we didn't usually say aloud, the grief that doesn't go away, but shifts shape over time. The parts of ourselves we kept hidden for years, the hopes we had buried so deep we forgot they were still alive. And slowly a picture began to form, not of a love story written in bright, dramatic strokes, but one painted with quiet colors. A story not of second chances, but new beginnings. That weekend, we went to the farmer's market together. Nothing special, just hand-picked peaches and fresh bread and the sound of laughter in the open air. But it felt right. Like the kind of ordinary that turns into memory. As spring melted into summer, our lives began to overlap in small, meaningful ways. Sunday morning breakfasts. Shared crossword puzzles. A new book left on my porch with a note. Thought you'd love this one. We didn't rush it. We didn't need to. Love. Real love. Doesn't always come with lightning bolts or sweeping declarations. Sometimes it comes in slow, steady footsteps. In a glance across a dinner table. In knowing someone will meet you at the door when the day's been hard. And one night, as we sat on my porch watching fireflies dance in the tall grass, he reached for my hand again. This time, there was no hesitation from either of us. "You know," he said, "I think we found each other exactly when we needed to." I smiled and rested my head on his shoulder. "No, I think we chose to see each other when we were finally ready." He nodded, and the night wrapped around us like a soft blanket. Not everything had changed, the world outside still turned the same. My garden still needed weeding. The clock still ticked forward, but inside me, something had opened. And I knew, deep in my bones, that this chapter of my life was no less worthy than any that came before. In fact, maybe it was the beginning of the most honest chapter yet. Point 1, built not on youth or timing or perfection, but on understanding. On courage. On the quiet magic of two people who'd lived through enough to finally know what matters. And so, to anyone listening, I say this. Don't give up on connection. Don't close the door on something just because it came later than you expected. Sometimes the most unexpected gesture becomes the beginning of everything.